Good morning, everyone. I know folks are still making their way into our virtual space, but I'm thrilled to kick us off this morning. Welcome to the FAFSA walkthrough training for those of you who guide our students. I'm Kathy McDonald, Assistant Director for Network Partnerships with the Florida College Access Network. Today's training came from the feedback we received from the exit surveys from the financial aid training we did a couple of weeks ago that let us know you would find a session like this helpful. So we really appreciate those of you who took the time to complete the surveys, and just wanted to share, we really do listen to your feedback in terms of planning our supports for you all. Now, just want to say a quick thank you and shout out to our partners today, the Florida Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, or FAFSA, not that that's at all confusing with FAFSA, and our friends at Florida Office of Student Financial Aid Assistance and Florida School Counselors Association, who all worked collaboratively to make this training possible. Before we get started with today's presentation, a few quick housekeeping items. First, we welcome your questions. I know on Zoom, many of you are familiar with using the chat. We're actually going to use the Q&A feature today since we're on a webinar. It allows us to record the Q&As, and it allows our volunteers to be able to answer those questions in real time. So if you have a question, you can submit it at any time. Excuse me, please do so. We have lots of FAFSA members, so financial aid experts, ready to answer your questions behind the scenes. So even if we don't answer it live with Daniel and Karima, you can still get your questions answered. So go ahead and put those in the Q&A at any time. I know many of you sent questions ahead of time when you registered, and please share those with us so that we can make sure you can get your questions answered. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so we'll put a link to the recording on our Florida FAFSA Challenge page on the FCAN website in case you want to listen to it again later, or if you want to share it with colleagues. So that usually takes us about a day or two to get those up. There's going to be another exit survey after today's session, and I encourage you to take a minute to complete that survey because that will help us plan for other supports for you in the future. Now, a quick reminder, today's session is a walkthrough of the actual FAFSA form so that you can see step-by-step what to expect as you're helping your students. If you're looking for that more general financial aid training with FAFSA, we did that a couple weeks ago. That was recorded. It is already on our Florida FAFSA Challenge webpage, as are the slides. So if you want to download those, so feel free to check back into that page in order to see that training if you missed it last time. Now, without further ado, I am so thrilled to welcome this morning Daniel Barkowitz, who's Assistant Vice President of Financial Aid and Veterans Affairs at Valencia College, and our go-to resident FAFSA expert, as well as his colleague, Dr. Karima Mansell, who's Associate Director, Office of Student Financial Assistance with the University of Central Florida. They are experts, not me. So Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for the introduction. And we are thrilled to have so many of you with us today for part 2 of our 12-part series on everything you needed to know. I'm just kidding, about financial aid, although maybe I'm not kidding, Kathy. This may wind up being a 12-part series. So we're going to start off today by introducing ourselves, and then we have a little poll to learn a little bit about you, and then we'll dive in. So, so again, my name is Daniel Barkowitz. I am Assistant Vice President for Financial Aid and Veterans Affairs at Valencia College, a position I've held for about 4 years. I have about 30 plus years of experience in financial aid, working at lots of different kinds of colleges. I was Director of Financial Aid at MIT, Dean of Financial Aid at Columbia University. I've worked for open access, selective institutions, public, private, so a wide range. And I'm thrilled to have my friend and colleague, and notice I put the word friend first, Karima Mansell, who's joining us today, and we're going to be playing tag team together. So Karima, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd as well?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Karima Campbell-Mansell. I'm one of the Associate Directors in the Office of Student Financial Assistance at the University of Central Florida. I have been doing this for some time, going on 20 years now, and I started when I was 2, so that will take care of any questions you may have about that. And so today we're really excited to walk through the FAFSA and go through and share all of the different parts of the FAFSA that students and parents will be completing so that you have that knowledge and insight as you assist your students. I'm going to turn the floor over to Daniel.
Great. And then as you heard Kathy say, we have a number of people in the background who are answering questions today for us. Please don't think we're the only two. We're the faces. Somehow they decided, we were the ones to represent, but there are a number of folks back there who are going to be able to answer your questions as they come up today. So we're going to start by learning a little bit about you. So we have a couple of poll questions. So Kathy, let's fire up the first one. So the first question is, how many years of experience do you have in your role? A couple of options: less than 1 year, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10, 11 plus. Please choose your vote, and we're going to give it another couple of seconds, and then let's see who we have in the audience.
Great. Got lots of votes coming in. Okay, they're starting to slow down, so let's give you about 5 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and close it out.
Curious to see who's with us today.
Kind of across the board.
Yeah, and actually our largest population is the 11 plus. So for those of you that are new to the profession, welcome. It's like financial aid. It's a black hole. Once you're in, you can never get out again. So as evidenced by those with 11 plus years, Kareem and I are lifers, once you sort of enter this field. So let's ask the second question, so we have a sense of sort of where you are with the FAFSA itself. How familiar are you?
Totally different question, right?
Yep. Yeah, you could be lots of years and never done a FAFSA, but where are you in this FAFSA process? FAFSA, what's a FAFSA? I know enough to be dangerous, but not really enough to answer questions. I've helped apply for aid for a student or for myself or for my family. People ask me for advice on how to complete the applications, or I could be leading this presentation. And be careful, if you answer that one, we will make you lead the presentation next time. Just kidding.
Yes, I think I fell into, okay, we're going to close that out and share that out. I'm in the, I know enough to be dangerous, which is why I have you both here today.
Okay, good. Well, and I noticed that, Karima, no one offered to lead the presentation. So I guess with that, we should probably dive in. So, so we have a 3-hour presentation for you. I'm just kidding. We have a probably about a 40-minute presentation, and then we will give you time for Q&A as we go through. And I want to thank our colleagues at Federal Student Aid. This presentation is really their slides. We've customized them for our purposes, but you'll notice that these are slides that the department has provided of their process. So we're going to launch right in. So let me start by saying what this presentation is and is not. So we are going to review the FAFSA screen by screen. We'll talk about how to access the Fsa Id, the student signature or parent signature process. We'll look at what happens when you submit the document, what families and students will get back as an output document. But we're not going to talk through a detailed summary of how financial aid works or any specific college or university's financial aid programs. We're not going to review individual circumstances for individual families. If you want more, and as Kathy said, if you want to learn more, we have the complete review of the financial aid system that Karima and I did a couple of weeks ago. That is available for you online. This is the direct YouTube link. And you also have my blog. So I do keep a financial aid blog, which is available for the public, with details on how the financial aid system works. You're welcome to check that out as well. And we will get you a copy of this PowerPoint along with the recording. So if you'd like to come back in and take a look. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about how to log in, how to complete the form, what's a SAR, how to make corrections, and what do we do with special circumstances. So let's launch in. So again, these screenshots we're going to show you are from the web version of the application. There is another application version or walkthrough with the mobile application. We're not going to use the mobile. We're going to use the web version, but by and large, it's mostly the same. And this gives you examples of how the new FAFSA 2223 looks when you log into it online. And it is available. The FAFSA went live on October 1, 2021. So this is what is live right now. So remember, students have choices about beginning, completing, and submitting either a new or renewal FAFSA form. So one piece you may not be aware of is once you've done a FAFSA once, when you renew it for subsequent years, it's a much easier process. There's a speedier process for renewal. We're going to show you the first time process today, but there is a much speedier process for those who renew. Students and parents who can are encouraged to use the Irs Data Retrieval tool, or what they call the Irs DRT, to electronically transfer their tax information right onto the FAFSA. And we'll show you that as we go through. And parents with multiple students, this is a nice piece, can actually transfer their information from one FAFSA to another. So if you've got a parent who's doing 2 student FAFSAs, they can actually move their information from one FAFSA to another very easily. And the other piece is, because the web and the mobile are in sync, you can start an application on the web, go to your mobile phone and continue the application, go back to the web, or back and forth as you need to. They do save their information as they walk through. Okay, so how do we log into FAFSA? This is studentaid.gov. So the home of the FAFSA is at studentaid.gov. That is the main place where you will begin. Under studentaid.gov, there's an Apply for Aid button. And if you click on Apply for Aid, you'll see all kinds of information. Complete the FAFSA form is one of the drop-downs that's available. And if you click on that, you'll get to this page. By the way, there's a shortcut to get here, which is fafsa.gov. So fafsa.gov will take you directly to this launch page as well. And here is where you begin the actual FAFSA application process. You can see new user versus returning user. The main difference is, again, for students who are just starting the process, they're going to start at the new to FAFSA process. Returning users will start on the second section. So new this year, when you log in, the first thing you're going to be asked is, who are you? Are you a student? Are you a parent? Or are you a preparer? So a preparer would be a third party who's completing an application for the student or parent. In most cases, there are very few situations where a preparer is going to be involved. Really, more often it's the student or parent who's completing the application. But that is the first step. If you select I'm a student, then it will ask you to log in. And this is where we first create or have the opportunity to create an FSA ID. So let's talk about the FSA ID. What is the FSA ID? FSA stands for Federal Student Aid. ID, your identifier. So the FSA ID is a combination of username and password, which a student or a parent is going to use to access their application and sign their application. It's what guarantees or puts into practice their identity on the form. And if you haven't created one before, you can choose create an FSA ID, and that will allow you to go through and actually create the process. Alternatively, you can actually log in using your personal identifiers, name, date of birth, and SSN. Really important, and I'm going to say this a couple of times, really important that the SSN for the student is the correct SSN. This is one of the only fields that cannot be fixed if you mess it up. Really important that you, the student or the student themselves, types in the correct SSN. Often, if it's the wrong SSN, they have to go back and do a brand new FAFSA. So really important they get that SSN correct at the front door. If they have an FSA ID, they can use that FSA ID to log in. Again, if they haven't created one before, they can create one using the built-in process. It'll match to their SSN and their date of birth. So we're going to come in and look at the application as a dependent student who's filling out parental information as well. If you remember in our last session, we talked about the difference between dependent and independent. Well, look, Kareem will actually help us looking at those questions a little later, and we'll remind you who's dependent versus who's independent. But the main difference on the FAFSA is when you're a dependent student, you have parent questions. When you're an independent student, you don't. Otherwise, all the questions are the same. So we're going to go through screen by screen and take a look at what we're being asked. So here we go. And you can see as you look at the top line here, you'll see a sort of a step-by-step section that helps the student understand where are they in the FAFSA completion. How far in the process have they made their way through? What questions remain ahead for them? Where are they? So we're going to start with this first personal information screen. Most often, the confusion I find comes from the word, and this is going to be silly, but the word your. Every time you see the word you or your on the FAFSA, it's referring to the student. This can be confusing if a parent's completing it because it's not your as in the parent, it's your as in the student. So your first name, your middle initial, your last name, your date of birth. Again, the you and your in this refers to the student. They ask for student email and phone number. Email is important because email is where the federal student aid is going to send a copy of the output document or notification that the output document is ready. So really important that that email be established. Also important, the student and parent have to have a different email address from each other. It cannot be the same email address. So again, you can't both as a student and a parent use the same email. Student address. Again, important address information, namely because the address is how we're establishing residency in the state. So for Florida, there's a requirement you've lived in Florida for at least 1 year to qualify for in-state tuition and for many of the state financial aid programs. So important that you establish that residency for a year before you start attending college. And we're using the state here as one of the ways to begin to document residency. It's not the only way, and there's more information required, but this starts the process. You'll see a question here. Have you lived, in this case, it's New Hampshire, but our students would answer Florida. Have you lived in Florida for at least 5 years? If you answered yes, then you move on. If you answer no, it will ask you for the date in which you became a resident of the state that you're residing in. Again, that's how we get to the 1 year mark. For most students, if you're born in Florida, it will be date of birth. If not, it'll be the day that the student moved to Florida. Also important here is the question about US citizen. And I know we've had some questions about citizenship versus non-citizenship. A reminder that not only US citizens are eligible for federal financial aid, some non-citizens also have eligibility, not DACA or not undocumented students, but students who are permanent residents or students who are parolees. There's a whole list of reasons why a student might be an eligible non-citizen, but that's where this is answered. In some limited cases, colleges may ask DACA students to complete a FAFSA. It's unusual, but it happens. In that case, one of the answers here is no, I'm not a US citizen or eligible non-citizen. So it's not unheard of for a DACA student to complete a FAFSA, but it is unusual. And again, they would want to talk to the college or scholarship program about if it's required. In most cases, would not be required. So after we go through, here's an example, by the way, of what happens if you say no, I haven't been here for 5 years. Then it will ask you, when did you become a legal resident of that state? And you can see the month and year requested. Next question is student education. This is another one that shouldn't be as tricky as it is, but sometimes it is tricky. So for our students. So the first question says, what will your high school completion status be when you start the school year? Will you have a GED? Will you have a high school diploma? Really important they answer correctly there. Many programs require a high school diploma. It's not what you have as of right now, it's what you will have when you start next academic year. What college degree or certificate will you be seeking when you begin the 22-23 school year? First bachelor's degree or associate's degree or whatever the student might be pursuing. This third question gets students tripped up sometimes. Will you have your first bachelor's degree before you start the school year? Remind students when you talk to them, we do, that a high school diploma is not a bachelor's degree. If you answered yes incorrectly here, you automatically exclude yourself from several financial aid programs, including the Pell Grant. So really important they answer this question correctly. If they don't have their bachelor's when they start the academic year, they should say no. This is another question that tricks people or trips people up. What will your college grade level be when you start the 22-23 school year? You can choose first year never attended or first year attended before. And then you can also choose second year, third year, fourth year, etc. Especially for our dual enrollment students, I advise them to answer first year attended before. The idea here is that they've attended college before, but the individual college is going to make a determination as to what grade level they really are based on the credits that have transferred in. So, and that can be changed. That answer will be changed by the college if appropriate. So again, I would generally answer, if they're dual enrollment, first year attended before. And the last question here, are you interested in being considered for work study? Generally, I always advise answer yes, unless you know you're not going to be working or don't want to work during the academic year. But generally, you don't want to turn down financial aid before it's offered. The next question is sort of redundant. It's not even necessary anymore because, in fact, the department doesn't require us to confirm this, but it is still on the FAFSA. This change was made by Congress too late to remove these questions from the FAFSA. In fact, I had a student the other day ask me, what is selective service? And I said, well, it's a great question. Let me back up and talk about the draft. So many of you may remember we have a draft. It hasn't been used since Vietnam, but we have a draft. For federal student aid purposes, until this year, men were required to prove that they were registered for selective service to receive federal financial aid. That requirement has been removed, but the question still remains. So we still encourage students to answer these questions accurately. Are you male or female is the first question. And this is, by federal definition, the gender assigned or sex assigned at birth, regardless of whatever transition may have been made. It is sex at birth. Are you registered with selective service, yes or no? Again, there'll be no repercussion if they're not, but it's important those questions be answered. Next question is driver's license. This is really more for reference checking for student loans. Not that important, but still we suggest students answer it if they have a driver's license with their information. Okay, and now I'm going to turn this, actually, sorry, one more question, then I'm going to turn this over to Karima, I think. Student foster care and parent education completion. Are you a foster youth or were you in the foster care system at any time? Yes or no? This is really for information purposes more than anything else. It doesn't guarantee independence, but it's important to understand. And then this next question asks about the highest school level completed by parent 1 and parent 2. Notice this doesn't say mom or dad. It says parent 1 and parent 2. Lots of reasons. First of all, parent 1 might be mom, parent 1 might be dad. We might have a same gender family, so the FAFSA is written to avoid any gendering of parents. And it is the only time you're going to answer about both parents, even if they're not living in the household with you. This is your birth parents, mom and dad. And the idea here is to understand if you're the first gen in college or first generation in college, because there may be some funding that is specifically for first generation students. Okay, moving on. Questions about student eligibility. Have you ever received federal student aid, yes or no? And have you been convicted of the possession or sale of illegal drugs for an offense that occurred while you were receiving federal aid? This drug question is another one that has been removed from the requirements for eligibility, but too late to have it taken off the form. So the question is there, but the answer to that question won't have any impact on the student. So moving on, the next thing we do is we search for your high school. So this is a way to associate the record with the high school that the student is graduating from. And this is a search feature. So the student can type in the name of the school, they can type in the city, they can look for it by state. Once they do in search, there's a search feature that will try to find the high school for them. Here's an example of what that might look like. They select the school, they confirm it, and it's now entered on their record. Then we get to college search. And a reminder, we talked about this last time, but you're limited to adding 10 colleges to the FAFSA. So for students who want to do more than 10, they need to do the FAFSA once, send it in, and then add them on the second round. And we'll talk about making corrections a little later in the presentation. But here's where you can search for college names. I will say one of the pieces that's helpful and important to understand is that you'll see on the right side, you can search using the federal school code. Many colleges point out their federal school code on their website. So a student can actually find their federal school code. Ours is 006750 at Valencia. Karima, I know you know yours off the top of your head. What is UCF's federal school code?
003954.
There we go. So you can type in the school code rather than looking up the school. That's important in some cases if you're not sure exactly the particular name of the school. So is it Miami University or the University of Miami, for example? Once you search and find the college, here's the school code example, you'll get a list of matching colleges. You can choose the one you want, and it will ask you for housing plans. Do you plan to live on campus, off campus, or with relatives? This is important because costs of attendance will be based in part on that answer, whether we give you an on-campus budget, an off-campus budget, or an at-home budget. And now with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Karima, who is going to continue on talking about the rest of the information on the FAFSA.
All righty, bear with me. I'm using two different devices here, one for audio and one for video. So I hope that you can see and hear me. But I want to drive home that this particular question, like Daniel said, is pertaining to the student. So we're looking at the student's marital status on the date that the FAFSA is being filed. For many of our students, they are single, and that's the answer to the question. However, if a student is not single, if the student is married, this is a very important question for them to answer correctly because it does pertain to their dependency status for financial aid purposes. Does the student have dependents for which the student provides more than 50% or more than half of the support for those dependents during the time frame of July 2022 through June 2023? So for our students who do have dependents for whom they provide their financial support, at least half of their financial support, the answer to this question is yes. Otherwise, the answer is no. Again, this is a question that determines the student's dependency status, which is going to determine whether or not parental information is required on the FAFSA. For the vast majority of our students who are graduating from high school, the vast majority are going to be considered dependent for financial aid purposes. Then there are some additional verification or dependency questions that are going to relate to when the student, I'm actually having a hard time reading this particular slide, that are going to relate. Thank you, Daniel. It's going to relate to the student serving in the armed forces, whether or not the student is a veteran. It also is going to relate to anything pertaining to certain events that could have happened after the student was 13. Were their parents deceased? Were they in foster care? Or were they considered emancipated as well? If the student was considered an emancipated minor, then that is a question that they'll answer there. And then finally, did the student have a legal guardianship? And I do want to emphasize legal guardianship because there are times where familial situations have students in custody of a particular person, but not necessarily in a legal guardianship. The questions outlined on the FAFSA are specific to the legal guardianship. If a student has a complicated familial situation, we're going to talk a little bit more in the presentation about special circumstances and professional judgment. And so then there is a question that pertains to whether or not the student was homeless or at risk for homelessness during any time after July 2020. If the student answers yes, then the student could be considered independent for financial aid purposes. There may be some additional steps the student needs to take in that process. If a student has answered no to all of the questions that we previously went through, then that student is considered dependent for financial aid purposes based on the information provided on the FAFSA, and we are going to need parental information to continue the FAFSA process. And so whose information should the parent or should the student provide? And so we're looking at either biological parents, or adoptive parents for purposes of the FAFSA. And if a parent has remarried and is the custodial parent, we are using step parent information as a part of the household as well. Here, students can answer what their familial situation is. My parents live together, whether they're married or unmarried. My parents are divorced and separated, and I live with one parent more than the other. My parents are divorced or separated, and I live with both parents equally, or I was legally adopted. So based on the question or the answer to this question, then students will provide the appropriate parental information. And so here, the question about marital status now is pertaining to the marital status of the student's parents. And the student will indicate whether their parents are married or remarried, if they're divorced or separated or single. All of that information is in that drop down, and then they will indicate the date. And then here they're going to enter their parent's social security number, parent's last name, parent's first initial, and parent's date of birth and email address. I do want to address that some parents may not have social security numbers. We might have parents who live out of the country. We may have parents who currently reside in the country but do not have a valid social security number. While a valid social security number is required for our students, it is not for our parents. And if a parent does not have a valid social security number, the parent can input all zeros, indicating that there isn't a valid social security number on file. And so then here, similarly to the student's state of legal residence, we are asking questions about the parent's state of legal residence. And so this parent will indicate how long they have lived in the state that's indicated on the FAFSA. And then there's going to be information on the parental dependents in a particular household. Dependent children of your parents are children who rely on the parent's support, financial support, between July 2022 and July 2023, and can answer no to every question on the FAFSA form. So if by chance a parent has a child who might be 25 years old, and that child is still someone that the parent is providing at least half of their support, that student cannot, or that child for that parent would not be able to answer yes to all of the dependency questions. And so therefore, that person would not be considered dependent for financial aid purposes. And then there may be other dependents outside of the parent's children who live with the parent, for whom the parent provides more than half of their support and will continue to provide more than half of their support through 22-23. And the parent can answer those questions there. And then information about, I think I just went through that one. Thanks. And then that household information, we're looking for the household size that's based on the information that the student and parent has provided. The student, the number of parents in the household, and the number of either dependent children or other dependents, that's going to determine the household size. Then the number in college are the number of the dependents and other members of the household, the parental members of the the number of dependents that are in college. Parents are not included in the number of college. So here in this particular scenario where they have 9 people in the household, there are 7 dependents, and they're asking how many of the 7 dependents are going to be in college for the 22-23 years. So if there are multiple siblings going to college, this is where that information is provided, but parental college information is not inputted here. And then we're going to ask about the parent's tax filing status. The vast majority of families have already completed the taxes because the 2022-23 FAFSA is going to be based on 2020 20's tax return. So the vast majority of our families have already completed the FAFSA, completed their taxes. They're going to indicate that here. A family can also indicate that they will file or that they are not required to file, so they will not file. If a family is eligible to use the Irs Data Retrieval tool, we highly encourage it. The Irs Data Retrieval tool is going to allow the tax filer to basically step away from the FAFSA website and import their IRS tax information directly into the FAFSA. This is a great tool. It helps the parents to have a more accurate FAFSA. It can reduce the likelihood of being selected for a process called verification, in which the family would be required to supply more documentation to the Office of Student Financial Assistance. And if by chance they are selected for verification and they've utilized the Irs Data Retrieval tool, this tool will mean that they don't have to submit additional tax documentation with other documentation being requested. So we do encourage our students and families to utilize this tool. The information does come in masked and it cannot be modified. And so it's pretty secure for them to go ahead and use this. And then in order to utilize the data retrieval tool, the parent is going to use their Fsa Id credentials. As Daniel mentioned, both our students and our parents do need an Fsa Id for the completion of the FAFSA. They'll put in their Fsa Id username and password and continue. And again, they'll be taken away from the FAFSA website shortly, directed to the IRS, and then that information is imported back into the FAFSA. If a parent chooses to not do the Irs Data Retrieval tool, then they're going to input the data from the taxes directly into the FAFSA application, starting with the adjusted gross income. The FAFSA provides the information on where the students and families can find the particular item that's being requested. So here you'll see that the IRS Form 1040, we're looking at line 11. And then we're going to ask some questions about income from work from each individual parent. This is the amount of income earned. This is IRS Tax 40 line 1, I believe I'm seeing here. And so here it's going to explicitly tell the student, the parent, what information they're pulling directly from the tax forms. And parent 1 and parent 2 information listed there as well. Thank you, Daniel. And then any additional IRS information, enter the amount of your parents' income tax for 2020. So the amount of income tax paid will be listed here. And that's going to, again, you'll see here that you're looking at line 22 minus schedule 2, line 2. And if it's negative, then they list 0. They didn't have any tax liability. And then there are some additional questions for tax filers as it relates to various components of their financial history and the types of investments and educational credits they were able to get when filing taxes. Again, it's going to tell them exactly where they find this information as well. And then if there was any child support paid due to divorce or separation, that's going to be listed here. Any earnings earned from a cooperative education program by a college, and any taxable earnings from need-based employment programs such as federal work study or need-based employment fellowships or assistantships are going to be listed here. This is not very common, but this is the section in which this would be listed. And then we have a section for untaxed income. So here we're going to take into account any child support received, any expenses paid on behalf of the family, any tax deferred pension or retirement saving plans payouts that were received. Additionally, really having a hard time reading some of this, any veterans disability benefits and any other untaxed income, such as workers' compensation and disability benefits that the parent may have received or the parents may have received, are listed here. Untaxed income is very important to capture the information for the family and the family's ability to pay. So this information is captured here. And then assets. So as of today, what is the parent's total balance in cash, savings, and checking accounts? Does the parent have investments in real estate? Not the primary home, though. Anything beyond the primary home. If there's secondary homes, rental properties, and so forth, that's where we would indicate that here. And as of today, what is the parent's net worth of current business and or farm investments? And that would be listed here as well. And then the student's tax filing status. For a lot of our students, they may not have been required to file taxes. However, if they are, they're going to indicate here that they have already completed them or they will file. or that they're not going to file because they're not required. So all of that is here. And now we're speaking to the student's financial situation. Our students who are independent, all of the parental information we just discussed, they would not complete that. They would be skipped to the student's financial section. And so after asking the student's tax filing status, we would then determine if the student could utilize the Irs Data Retrieval tool. Again, just like with our parents, if the student is eligible to use the data retrieval tool, we do highly encourage it. And then they would proceed to the IRS's website. And then if they choose to not do that, they're going to input the information line by line, similarly to the parents. And there you're going to see that the adjusted gross income information is similar to the parent section and showing them where they would find the information. And they're also going to put in their income for work. And if they are married, their spouse's income as well. Any additional IRS information is going to include the student tax liability, so the amount of taxes the student was required to pay. And then those additional questions in regard to the type of funding the student may have or may have gotten for educational credits or IRA distributions. So some additional tax questions here. And then some additional financial information, similarly to the parents, if any child support was paid due to divorce or separation, any earnings from work of cooperative education programs, and earnings from need-based employment programs such as federal work study and fellowships and or assistantships. And then untaxed income, as I mentioned before, if the student received child support, if there was anything paid on behalf of the student, any payments of IRA distributions, the veterans disability or other disability payments, or workers' compensation, all of that information would be inputted here. And then similarly to the parent, as of today, the total amount that the student has, is it in excess of $2,200? If the answer to that question is yes, then the student does have to provide some additional information, such as the balance in their current savings account, checking account, and cash that they have on hand, their investments in real estate beyond their primary residence, as well as any business or farm net worth that they have. If this is being prepared by a paid preparer, and as it says here, this is rare, then that information would need to be provided. In most cases, the answer is going to be no, and the student will continue to signing and submitting the form. They are going to get a summary of what they have done, and they can have an overview of all of the answers that they have submitted on the FAFSA. And so here we're seeing the student demographics section and all of the information that they have provided here. And then we will move on to the all of the information there. I think I just lost my video, but I'm going to go ahead and continue. And then here, they also are going to provide more information on the summary that includes the parental demographic and parental financials. And so again, this gives the students and the parents an opportunity to look at the answers that they have submitted and to see if there's anything that they need to modify before moving forward with signing and submitting. They can sign and submit using their Fsa Id, and they want to make sure that they read all of the details before proceeding. And after reading all of the details and agreeing to the information there, they're going to sign and submit the FAFSA. The student in this instance is already signed. And then here we're looking for the parent to sign. So the parent is going to proceed to sign in using the parent's Fsa Id and password. And then the parent will indicate which parent they are and continue. And then similarly to the student, there are some things that the parent is indicating here that they are certifying that the information provided is accurate to their knowledge, and that they have submitted the appropriate income tax information. And here they'll put in the parent's Fsa Id and password, and that will sign the form electronically. And then the information is sent to the schools that the student has indicated, and the student does receive information about the institutions. So they receive information on the graduation rate and the retention rate, as well as the transfer rate of the institutions that have been listed on the FAFSA. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel.
Great job, Karima. That was not easy. That was a mouthful. So great job. We are going to move quickly through the student aid report, which is what comes back from the FAFSA. We'll talk about making corrections, and then we'll talk about some special circumstances. So really quickly, what is the student aid report? Well, if you go back in after the FAFSA is done, what we get is called an ISIR at the school. It's an institutional student information record, ISIR. The student receives a SAR, or student student aid report. That student aid report includes all their FAFSA answers, also tells them what their EFC is, their expected family contribution, and allows them to look at their financial aid history if they have any from previous years. So when they log back in, they can either edit their FAFSA form to make corrections, or they can view their student aid report. If they choose the student aid report, they can see, again, what their expected family contribution number is. In this case, it's 0. They also have what's called a data retrieval number. If they forgot to include a school and the school wants to add the FAFSA on their end, if the student provides that data release number to the school, they can pull the FAFSA in as well. So it's important to know your data release number. And here we go again in terms of the FAFSA data. So you can walk through and see what's been processed. And when you pull it up, you have, again, a copy of all of the information that was provided. So let's talk about corrections. So FAFSA corrections are an opportunity. Let's say you've made a mistake, you need to go back in and correct it. Or let's say, for example, you put the wrong school in, or you had 10 colleges and now you want to add 5 more, or you realize that you put the wrong amount in for your adjusted gross income. You meant to type in 100,000 or 10,000 and you typed in 100,000. How do you log back in and correct that? Well, you have an option as a student to log back in and correct your application by clicking edit FAFSA form. If you edit the FAFSA form, you'll ask you to create a save key so you can come back, just a 4-digit random number, and you can go back in and correct individual sections and make whatever correction is necessary section by section. Let's say you made a mistake in your demographics, you moved, you can put the new address in, and again, depending upon what information, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but depending upon what information you want to correct, you can go back through and correct the appropriate information. Once you've gone through, you can, again, sign it and transfer it, and it will send a second transaction to those colleges that you've listed on the FAFSA, providing that updated information. This is the way, again, that students who want to apply to more than 10 colleges can actually add those other colleges on top of their first 10 by logging in after the first transaction's done and removing some colleges and adding others. So Karima, back to you.
All righty. So special circumstances. Special circumstances account for times when the FAFSA doesn't capture the student's particular situation. And we know that that does happen at times. So there are times when a student's dependency status may not be cut and dry. I don't have a better way to say it. There might be more complicated familial situations. So the student may not be able to answer yes to any of the questions outlined on the FAFSA. However, the student might be, as I mentioned earlier, living with a relative who isn't their parent, but there might not be a legal guardianship or file, or the student may have been the victim of abuse or abandonment. And these more complicated situations are what we call a dependency override in financial aid. So the student would be interested in contacting their school that they're going to be attending so that that school can share with them their process for dependency override. So impact of not providing parental information. We do recognize that some parents have made a decision to not assist their students with the financial aid process. They are unwilling to complete the FAFSA, and they are also not providing any support to their students financially. In those instances, it is possible for the student to also make contact with the school that they plan to attend, so that we can look at the possibility of doing what in our office we refer to as a parental non-assist. If there is no parental information on the FAFSA is for a student who appears to be dependent. The FAFSA is going to essentially reject. It is not going to process fully. And so if a student, again, has a dependency override situation, or has a situation where the parent is refusing to complete the FAFSA and is refusing to provide any financial support, then the student wants to make contact with the institution that they are going to attend. And that by doing that, what will essentially happen is the institution will share with them what their process looks like. For many of our students, if they are looking at a parental non-assist, essentially what that means is that they will not get a comprehensive financial aid package. They would only be eligible for the unsubsidized loan in which the interest does accrue. So for special circumstances, again, you want to reach out to the school of choice. This is if the student doesn't live with the parents don't provide support, the student isn't listed on the tax return, and the parent is unwilling to provide information on the FAFSA. This is when we can look at solely the unsubsidized loan option. That is all we had. We did want to save some time for questions this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any questions that we need to go through.
So Kathy, I know there were some questions submitted initially. Are there questions that we have not addressed that folks had sent in, or are there questions that are Q&A that we might want to address?
Some of the more simple, if that's a word, less complicated questions is just if somebody wants to see a printed version of the FAFSA so they have it at their financial aid event so people can look through it, because a lot of times it helps people know sort of what questions are coming. Where do they find the current one?
Yep. So I will type in I'll send out to the entire audience the link for that. But there used to be what was called a FAFSA on the web worksheet, where you could actually download and print. One of the challenges, and we didn't really talk about this today, is we've shown you every question. And the reality is many families don't answer every question. Right. So families that have under $50,000 of income, for example, or might qualify for what we call an auto zero EFC, will actually have a vastly reduced set of questions. So, we don't want to overwhelm families by giving them the whole list of every single question, because the reality is they may not actually need to answer every question.
They may actually not even need to answer a lot of them, depending on,
Right.
some of those early questions. Yeah. And then related to that, there's no way in a session like this that you're going to catch every situation. There's always unique things that come up. How do folks reach out to FSA, or I guess who should they be reaching out to if they have a more complicated situation or have a question, and where are those numbers or where do they link to?
Sure, I can take that. If the question is directly related to the completion of the FAFSA, then they want to reach out directly to FSA. 1-800-4-FED-AID will get you connected with an FSA representative. Some of the things that I was talking about, such as special circumstances and unique situations, then the student wants to reach out to the school that the student plans to attend, because those are handled at the school level.
And Karima, if I'm remembering correctly, if they call the 1-800 number, they do have folks answering that phone line that speak different languages. So if a parent, if their primary language is a different language, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I'll also say, just going back a second, although it's not really advertised, there is still a paper FAFSA. So yes. If the family does need to do a paper FAFSA, this is going to sound ridiculous, but the way you do that is you call 1-800-FED-AID and they can mail you a paper FAFSA, or you can log in, download a paper FAFSA, fill it out and mail it in. We don't recommend it for all the obvious reasons. It takes longer, it's less accurate, et cetera, et cetera. But it is still possible to do a paper FAFSA as needed.
Yeah, great reminder. We don't have a ton of time left, but we do have about 4 minutes before I need to close us up. Do you want to touch on verification at all?
Sure, in 4 minutes.
In 4 minutes?
Great. Yes, absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first I'm going to paste. Here's the announcement. Hopefully folks in the audience can see that. This is the announcement to how to get to the FAFSA on the web worksheet and other information. So please check if you have chat. You should have a chat message that gives you that information. So what is verification? So verification is the federal government's way of confirming what's placed on the FAFSA. Some random number of students will be selected to participate in verification. And if you're selected, students have to confirm that information on the FAFSA. The number has been as high as half. Recently, it's down to about mid-20s in terms of percent-wise who's selected. Actually, in the 21-22 year, it's actually down to 0%. So for the remainder of this year, the federal government has waived verification. But for 22-23, it still is a reality. And if that is the case with your family, they will be asked to provide a copy of their tax return if they didn't already link to the IRS, or they'll be asked to provide a verification worksheet confirming who's in their family and other information. So verification can be a stumbling block for some families, but it really is not something this college has selected. It is a requirement that's placed on us by federal student aid to confirm the information that families have entered. Karima, anything you want to add about verification?
Yeah, what I would say is a student is typically aware of being selected for verification, and it is really important for the student to get the ball rolling on the verification process as soon as possible. Verification can be a barrier. I want to be very transparent about that, but the earlier that a student gets the ball rolling to get the information to their institution so that verification can be completed, the better position the student is to know their solidified financial aid package and to plan accordingly.
And I will also say the other piece that's coming is for the 24-25 academic year, there are going to be major changes to the FAFSA, including, by the way, that you will have to log into the IRS when you start your application. So keep in touch with us. There are a lot of changes coming in the 24-25 year, which is only 2 years away. And so we will more than likely have to have a conversation again at that point to review the new FAFSA and the new SAI, Student Aid Index, which is replacing the EFC. So the process will look very different, and we think verification will look very different starting in 24-25 and moving forward.
So that leads in, or it allows me to make a plug to please fill out the exit survey. Once you log out of Zoom, an exit survey will pop up. We know that a lot of stuff is changing with FAFSA going into that following year. And so next fall is our opportunity to help you all learn what are the changes and how do you support your students. So we want your input on how do you want to get that training. So that's one of the questions that's in that exit survey. So I want to make sure you all do that. Daniel and Karima, as always, thank you. I've got just a couple more concluding slides that I'll finish us up with. So let me jump over there and share. Whoops. Now it's, sorry, that always ends up blocking my keys to sharing that. So let me do that super quick. From current slide, great, and let me swap this back over. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Daniel and Karima. Thank you for all the questions you put in the chat. That helps us know what your needs are and how we can help you. As you'll remember, there we go. This morning's session was walking you through the FAFSA. We have one set up for the students and parents next week on October 19th. We are thrilled to welcome back Karima to help with that. So that's the save the date is October 19th. If you can be sure to share that with your students, that will be run through the Florida Shines platform. So I've put the entire URL up there so that you know how to put your students in contact with that. And just a brief reminder, we do offer several handouts that are great to share with your students and parents. Those are on our Cash for College page. There's a top 5 reasons to complete the FAFSA, what you need to know to complete it, and then the common mistakes that are made. Both of those last 2 are in both English and Spanish, so you can print those out and share. I also wanted to make sure you are aware of an upcoming webinar, Strengthening Campus Connections, How Living Learning Communities Increase Student Success. Those communities specifically help with retention for our first gen and our students of color. So that's a great one to learn more about those living learning communities and to help encourage your students to sign up for one when they apply to college, to a college or a university. So with that, if you aren't already registered for our initiatives, I encourage you to do so. That way we make sure you always have updated info on these types of sessions. We will be doing 2 more sessions coming out of this, one specifically on undocumented, another one specifically on foster care students. Since you all asked for it, I don't have dates for those yet, but if you're registered with us, we will make sure you get the upcoming announcement on both of those. So with that, have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us today and stay safe out there. Take care.